Thank you for joining our Zip Chat today. We're on episode 12. With that, I'd like to introduce our host for Zip Chat is Mike Watson. He's our SVP of Engineering. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks everyone for joining today. Like Jill said, today is episode 12, and we're talking about global teams and specifically challenges around disparate time zones. So you have to deal with multiple time zones. What challenges do those create, and what are some techniques that we can put together to make that easier? So that's what we have with the topic. So today my panelists are Paul Wilson. He's from Intertech Alchemy. He's the Director of Engineering and Security. Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
And also we have Mukund Rajmanar, and maybe I got that right. I always have trouble with that one. And he is Director of Engineering here at Accelerate, one of my key partners in crime. So Mukund, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
All right. So like I said, today's focus is going to be around the global nature of specifically around engineering and how we can do global engineering better, and specifically attacking the challenge of time zones. And just another note is this Zip Chat format is designed to be interactive, so feel free to let Jill know that you want to ask a question, and if we can, we'd like to get you on live to ask that question. So that's always the best. You can join the panel, so to speak. Unlike a webinar where it's really kind of more of a lecture and there's some interaction, this is intended to be very much more interactive. So with that, I'm going to jump into the topic. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and do a poll real quick. Just a quick icebreaker poll. So just curious, how many people out there are dealing with multiple time zones? Yeah. So anyway, you can see the answers here. I mean, obviously, if you live in the U.S., then you're probably, dealing with 2 or 3 time zones there. But if you're, really an isolated, or not isolated, but type of company that really only has one location, maybe that's also true.
Hey, Mike, most people have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And the results are pretty split.
Yeah, well, it looks like people do 2 to 3 time zones. This is exactly what I would expect. When I was at Motorola, I actually had teams in 4 time zones, maybe 5, and that was certainly interesting. It was around the world too, so we had to figure out ways to like have a staff meeting, like where was the common time when it's 24-hour clock. So those were interesting challenges. Let's go from there. So Mukund, we brought you onto the panel, one, because we like you. But the other is, more importantly, that you deal with a lot of teams, and you deal with this problem a lot, global teams and working across time zones. So from your perspective, what do you see as the challenges? Like, as you boil up all the results from all these teams, what are the most significant challenges you face?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I would say the top challenge which teams face when they work with the different time zones is the limited time they have for sharing context. So it can be either the domain knowledge which need to be shared with the remote worker. It can be the technical practices that are being used in the software development project, or it can be better exploration of the requirements. So this always continues to be a challenge, and it's a continuous improvement to the processes to make that better. That is one of the major challenges they're seeing. Obviously, communication, because not only is the other person a member of your team not sitting with you in the same room, but he's not even, you can't even meet the other person throughout the day because they're not available all the time, right? And most of the time, there is just an overlap period when the other person is accessible. So communication tends to be a challenge. And sometimes when one person asks a question and the other person doesn't get to respond to it in the overlap period, and then maybe responds to it later in the day, the entire day is wasted by the person at the other end. So, it is in the evening waiting for an answer so that he can work on it the next morning, and he doesn't get the answer on time, or he doesn't get the work done. So that leads to a lot of wasted time. So people tend to lose days that way. So I would say these are the top 3: communication, context, limited overlap time, and feedback loop problems.
Yeah, that makes sense. The losing a day especially is, what I hear is the biggest complaint. Like whenever people ask me about, like, how do you manage this, and how do you solve that problem? And everyone has a horror story about working in a situation where frequently these days are lost, right? So I think one of the things that we have to do going forward is, in this discussion, is talk about how we avoid that. That particular problem is really important to avoid. So I'm going to jump over to Paul. So Paul, I know when we first met, you were working pretty much, single team, single time zone for the most part. I mean, you had a few remote employees, and you were very comfortable in that mode. And when you started thinking about how do you work globally, I remember you and I talking about that, and you had some concerns. So why don't you highlight what your concerns were? Because they're probably common to anyone that's, moving into that mode.
Certainly, yeah, and thank you, Mike. And you're right. We were very much used to working in a very close-knit teams. Everybody was local. Everybody could come into the office. Everybody was in person for all of our meetings. And then so when we first started talking about this, I did have one of them primarily was, for me anyway, was we had very flexible work schedules. We were able to be flexible what time people came to work and what time they left to accommodate for quality of life and obviously poor commuting times in living in a city. And so I was concerned about how that would be affected and how the engineering teams would respond to that. And like Makun just mentioned, I was also concerned about the communication, the long distance communication. We were very used to being able to just reach right out and touch the person next to you, and talk with them, and get immediate feedback. So I had some concerns there. And then, like most dev managers, I was concerned about velocity. Bringing on a new team, I was concerned about velocity and quality, but that's a concern really about bringing on any new resource rather than just bringing on an offshore team. But those are my three main concerns I had going into this.
Yeah, that makes sense. So once you got started, did any of those concerns really manifest? I mean, did you actually have some challenges at the beginning that you had to address? And, tell me a little bit about that.
I would say, honestly, the one that really was a challenge and really required us to make some changes or some evolution per se was the time frame, right? And trying to get onshore resources and offshore resources to be able to join the same agile meetings and the same ceremonies. And so we basically what we did on our end was we kind of slid the stand-ups. We used to do them at like 10 a.m. and we slid them to, some of them started at 8:30. So we slid them a couple hours earlier, and then the offshore teams kind of slid their schedule a little later in the evenings or afternoons to accommodate so we could all join together. Ironically, what we found out was it ended up being a good thing, because we found it actually supported the flexible work schedule even more, because people could get up and join the calls from home rather than having to scurry into the office and try to be in person. And then they could just come into the office after the meetings were over, which was generally after rush hour. So it worked out very, very well for us.
Yeah, that's an interesting positive side effect of that problem.
It really was.
Everyone gets a better commute. And, obviously the tools now, I mean, I've been doing remote global things for many years, since probably 2000. And the tools have gotten a lot better and makes it a lot easier to work from home in that fashion. You can do video calls, and, it's very convenient. I think one of the things that's nice is you don't have to all scramble to rush in and get into a common room and, have your polycom that, not everyone can hear who's in the room and all that. So the tooling definitely makes this better.
Ironically, I think we've been together for almost 2 years now, and we made these changes, quite some time ago. And then whenever with recent issues and, with COVID-19 and everything, when we decided to work remote, we were having all of our meetings 100% online anyway. So we didn't skip a beat by working remote.
Interesting. Yeah, that's so you really were already in that mode, and so
Truly.
Just keep doing it. Just don't commute into the office now. So Makun, do these initial challenges resonate with you? And
Yeah.
This is the typical thing that happens at the beginning, and how do you manage that?
So yeah, I mean, so there are some easy fixes. What the important thing which you highlighted was tooling has come a long way. right from the Polycom days to making sure that we have a proper stable connection, and somebody runs the demo and then tries to share their screen, and another person is talking on the Polycom. So things are way better now. One trick which we use these days, which helps a lot, is to use video recordings. Bandwidth and storage are now good. So knowledge sharing, you can always record a video about it. You don't have to do it for the first person. When you actually do the knowledge transfer, the conversation can be recorded, and then that can be shared to the next person. And doing this frees up time during the overlap, right? So you don't really necessarily need to spend the few hours a day doing knowledge transfer. You could just, point somebody to a video which they can watch at their own free time. And then, the idea is that when you have a limited number of hours as a common overlap, we need to use that effectively. So you need to have, if you're doing your daily scrums, have that time box, keep a focused agenda, and make sure that somebody facilitates it in a nice way, so that if some discussion is required, there can always be breakout sessions after the daily stand-up, right? And from an agile perspective, when we write the user stories and the backlogs, or when we have the ticketing system for defect fixes and all that, more effort is required to make sure that things are verbose. You don't assume that the remote worker knows everything, and make sure that whatever is the acceptance criteria or whatnot gets updated in the ticket, and then the ticket or the user story stays relevant, because things keep changing. I mean, that's the nature of the business. So that would help to shorten the amount of time you need to spend on a video call or a phone trying to explain things to somebody, and then say, no, that's not what I meant. This is what I meant, and that is what it is, and all that. So, and last, tools like Slack, Microsoft Teams, they are amazing. You can have all levels of conversation. They are asynchronous communication. People can get into a conversation thread, read up on the entire history, get up to speed. Everybody has access to shared resources, a shared document, and all that. So the collaboration with the instant messaging is specifically software like Slack and MS Teams helps a lot. They are better than emails, which don't, which can become very unwieldy these days. And yeah, I mean, code review tools, amazing state-of-the-art code review tools, which we have going on GitHub, or you post your own GitLab, or get tools like Gerrit, which is Google's kind of complicated, very powerful code review tool. So I think tooling is a good option, making sure that we have a focused attention on how we spend the overlap time, and making sure that people are, somebody facilitates the entire thing so that things happen as per schedule. I think those are the easy fixes which people can do from the top of my mind.
Yeah, that's a good list, Mukund. So I want to expand on a couple of those points. So Paul, I like having you on here because you have like real world experience, making some of these transitions. So other than the time change in your stand-ups, was there anything else that you did in your stand-ups to help accommodate, the remote team and make that easier? And like Mukund was saying, focus on, optimizing the overlap windows.
We did make some changes to the stand-up. When we went into this, we were doing very traditional. We had Scrum Master certified lead developers running stand-ups, and it was very, very traditional. What do you work on, right? What are you working on? Do you have any blockers? And we were in and out very quickly. And so even though we still try to keep them very, very short, for the spirit of the stand-up, but one thing we noticed early on was the acceptance criteria sometimes wasn't, because we knew the application much better, because domain knowledge. The acceptance criteria wasn't always well vetted enough for someone from another team to actually pick it up and know what was expected. One of the things we actually did was we added a product owner on the offshore side to work with the product owners in our office. So they had a product owner who could help make decisions in their time zone in a more real-time fashion. And that really, really helped quite a bit. One other thing we did was we sort of evolved away from just having the Scrum Master run the stand-ups, because we wanted everybody to have the ownership. We wanted everybody to feel like part of the team. And so we started rotating through every team member, no matter which time zone you were in, on a regular basis, that you had to run the stand-up for a period of time. So you actually had to go prepare ahead of time and be ready to run that. And it really fostered a lot of, at least in my opinion, a lot of ownership a lot of cross-functional team identity. Everybody started to really feel like one team, which I found that was very useful.
That last point's very interesting because you could apply that even outside of this remote situation. But I think ultimately the goal was for everyone to understand how hard it was to do a stand-up, like to actually facilitate a stand-up and do it correctly. And did you find that rotation schedule helped make you more efficient in the stand-ups? Like people were attending, they were more, or sorry, not attending, but more attentive. That's the word I'm looking for.
Actually, what I found out was once people have the responsibility of actually running the stand-up, and it's very awkward when you ask a question and it falls on deaf ears basically, and you're trying to pull information out of people, so they know what that feels like. So then whenever it was not their turn, when somebody else's turn, everybody's much more engaged and happy to share. And so it wasn't just the stand-ups. That actually helped in the release plannings. It helped in the retrospectives. It helped in almost all of our ceremonies.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just checking to see if we have any questions from the audience yet. I don't think so. Mukund, I want to highlight something you said earlier about the video recordings or just recordings in general. I think actually there's two things that you talked about that actually are in the same umbrella, which is how do you take the tacit knowledge that a team that was working in the same space shares? Like Paul, you're mentioning that, like the team is together and they can share information very easily. How do you kind of make that sharing expand beyond the borders of the one room? And I think the having tools like the ability to record like a demo or something so that you don't have to do a live demo, and also the ability to have these archives and like Slack where there's a channel where you can put information in and it actually is durable over time, and a new person could go back and look through those. Those seem to be really helpful tools. What are your thoughts on that, and what ways have you used those types of techniques to help share context amongst teams?
So specifically with regard to domain knowledge and knowledge sharing, one of the other two practices which we found good was sharing feature summaries with the entire team. So we generally recommend using something like a Confluence or any other wiki software so that before a backlog of stories is created, you basically write a feature summary saying, this is what we are trying to build. These are the target customers for this feature, and this is how it will be used in the real world situation. And then you kind of talk through the different personas and the workflows and general mockups. This document, people like developers, for example, tend to ask questions on that if they want to, because there's a very good comment section, and then the product owner keeps updating that. So at any one point of time, that acts as a source of truth. So if wireframes keep changing, for example, you always keep the latest one in the feature summary so that everybody knows. And then when you create user stories, just as an example, you link back to the feature summary saying, this is the user story, this is what I want built, and here's the acceptance criteria. And for more information, go and refer to the feature summary. That I find helps a lot, especially when in complicated systems, and that has helped. Video recordings, like I said, it works both ways, right? So any new topic of discussion, video recording helps. People ask questions based on, they play back the video a few times. They try to understand things which they would have missed the first time. Then they go back and ask questions about it. So that helps. Videos also, again, help during demos. So if you're doing a demonstration of the feature you built in a sprint, you can actually record a video of it so that people can watch the video and know what has been built. So, you don't have to keep everybody's so that all the stakeholders don't necessarily have to attend the demo at the same time, and people can watch the video at their leisure and understand what has been built, and obviously access the system to see if things work the way they should. So I think a combination of video, a combination of a wiki page or a feature summary, in addition to a backlog, helps a lot for knowledge transfer. Paul, you had something to say about videos as well, right? I mean, I thought you did it a little differently.
Yeah, actually, and you brought up really good points. We've tried to make really heavy use of Confluence for domain knowledge, especially because we tried to have it for onboarding anyway, and we improved on it. So when we onboarded the offshore team, it gives context exactly to what we ran, because we have a legacy application that's been under development for a very long time, and we found that really shortened the on-ramp. even though we moved most of our agile ceremonies to earlier in the day to help accommodate, one of them we couldn't really do which was the stakeholder demo, because it was very difficult to get all the stakeholders together that early in the morning, and they were all local. So what we ended up doing is the local team does all the demos every 2 weeks, but we actually leveraged Slack. We created a Slack channel specifically for demos. And then so developers can do a quick recording of what they've done, drop it in there, and get almost instant feedback from product owners or from UI UX designers or from other developers before they actually finish those tickets. So it's ongoing throughout the entire sprint, just many little demos. And then the folks that are here local use that information to demo to the stakeholders. And we found that was an incredible feedback loop that really helped a lot.
Yeah, it's almost like the idea of continuous demos, right? So
almost, yeah, exactly.
As soon as you're done with something, you put it out as a demo and you get that feedback before you even have to context switch. That's awesome. I mean, I know I've worked on teams where you do daily demos, like right at stand up, you have a demo section or something, but like this sounds even better because it's low touch, can be done on your own time. It doesn't require you to make sure that people are available for a certain time slot. If someone's out for the day, they don't lose the ability to be part of that demo. So that sounds awesome, actually. Okay, so let's change topics, or not topics, but let's change to. So those are some good tactical things that we've come up with to do this, but there's some bigger picture things that also really help here. So Paul, I want you to share your story about like how your management helped you be successful, right? Because I think buy-in is really important. And so why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Buy-in I think is very important. And like we said, we had a very tight-knit group of people and a very rich culture that everybody really liked. And this was a major shift in the culture. But our engineering leadership from the top down did a great job of really reinforcing it kind of changed our mantra we went to more of what we refer to as a one team. We even changed some of the Slack channel titles to one team to reinforce the message. So it was one global team, and that message was reinforced over and over and over again. And we actually talked to every one of the employees. It explained the vision. We explained why we were doing this and what we thought the impact would be and what the outcomes would be. And one of the positive outcomes that we tried to reinforce was we're located in Austin, Texas, and the market, the tech market in Austin can be very competitive. And we had a couple of very large projects we wanted to get done, but we were struggling to actually find enough qualified candidates. And so this allowed us to circumvent that altogether and onboard and basically double the size of our engineering team in a very short period of time. So, but that message of we're one team, we're all in this together, and this is why we're doing this over and over and over. And really, I was pleasantly surprised that all of our employees really embraced it. They saw the value in it, and they really embraced it. And I honestly, I think we have, at least for every development team that is working on some of our SaaS applications, it is a mixed team of onshore and offshore. I think we have 5 dev teams that are mixed right now, so everybody's embraced it, and you wouldn't even know now that we haven't been doing this the entire time.
Interesting. I think I ran into one of your engineers at one point, and she was really happy because she needed help. Like you were struggling so much to get help, and even though there were challenges, and even though they had to change time, they had to move meetings earlier, and disrupt their normal pace. They really enjoyed the fact that they were getting good quality developers, and they were getting that relief, which is great. I'm glad that worked out for you in that situation.
I think that was the sentiment across the board as well. Everybody was very happy with the skill level of the developers in which that we were able to bring on. So in a very short period of time, everybody was ramped up, and it was literally like one team, literally.
That's a great story. Hey, Makun, so thinking about that, I mean, thinking about successful and unsuccessful engagements and all that, have you seen a trend where this management engagement really helps?
Yes.
Things
So
like
there
that?
was, I have a recent example where the team did not know that the management was missing customer deadlines. That's how disconnected they were from the entire process, right?
Wow, yeah.
And that wasn't
Right.
good for anybody. But at the end of the day, when that came to realization, then obviously things changed. So then we said, okay, let's make an effort to make sure that everybody knows that they're part of something bigger and what the big picture is and how things are happening. So that happened because there were plenty of silos in that organization, pretty large organization. So it was kind of difficult for somebody writing software to know what's the impact of what they're doing. So I think what Paul described as making sure that management drives that one team vision and making sure everybody knows what they're a part of and what they're building. I think that's critical, especially when you have remote workers. It doesn't matter where they are. So I think that's a good practice.
Yeah, and one
If I
of the
had to
things
recommend one thing to anybody considering this, one thing I think we did, Mike, and I think you remember, very early on, we brought a couple of the team members over and spent a week with us. I think it was a couple of senior developers, or a senior developer and a product owner. And they spent a week with us and got to know our senior developers. And I think that face-to-face communication, that 1 week spent together, really, they understood on both sides that, yeah, these were high quality developers, and everybody knew kind of what they were doing, and that built mutual respect almost instantly.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. But also, what's helpful there, I'm sure, is, and I've seen this, throughout my career, is you build that personal rapport, and it's easier to communicate in all the different channels, right? So if you need to pick up the phone or you need to instant message someone, there's a common understanding, that you got the same goal and that there's no, weirdness. Because one of the things that I see with remote offices, especially when there's a big time zone difference, is this us versus them, and sort of behind the curtain kind of thing. What's going on behind that curtain? And so anything you can do to break down that barrier, which usually there's nothing going on behind the curtain, but just the fact that there is something that looks kind of like a curtain there, it creates doubt. So building trust and establishing a good rapport and opening communication channels like that, I think really help. So that sounds like a really good strategy of trying to get the people together somehow, even though they're from remote offices. There's definitely a budgetary impact to that, but I've just seen it accelerate engagements from my own personal experience, teams that I've run. We sort of talked about this maximizing the overlap window, but I wanted to highlight I want to circle back to that because I think it comes down to good agile discipline. Like if you're doing the things right in your agile process, and it doesn't have to be perfect, no agile process is going to be perfect. I think those things really do help, right? So, for instance, self-reporting, your self-reporting your status, right? So updating your Jira tickets or whatever system you're using, and making sure that those are updated before stand-ups, and that you're not focusing on trivial status matters in your overlap windows. I think that's really important. Are there any other things like that? I mean, we talked about requirements. I just want to make sure we fully hit this particular topic. Is we talked about making sure requirements are done really well. Is there any, and mostly not, I guess well is not, the point is, I think more information has to be communicated because you're dealing with, the fact that this information has to be consumed offline a lot of times versus online. There isn't the ability to circle back an hour later and say, what did you mean by this word or this phrase inside there? So did you see, Paul, that acceptance criteria tightened up necessarily?
Yeah, I think it had to, and it did. I think also one thing that I think we had to be a little bit more diligent about, which was our groomings. We did groomings. We had to really be diligent about making sure everybody understood the acceptance criteria. And because it's easy just to be quiet in those meetings and not say anything, but so we had to be very, very diligent about that and make sure we took the time, and we actually started doing more groomings to the point where we were doing at least 1 hour per week, just to make sure everybody knew, because agile is agile, so things change. Sometimes priorities change. tickets come into a sprint, pull tickets out. But that additional attention to detail and grooming and acceptance criteria really helped us keep a really well-groomed deep backlog, which helped. I mean, granted, you want to kind of it's kind of a balancing act, right? Because you want to do a just-in-time backlogs. You don't want to have a lot of work invested in something you're not going to do if priorities change. But I think it really helped a lot, and it went a long way to helping newer people who've been onboarded more recently cross that gap of the knowledge transfer much quicker.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and one of the things with the overlap time, I think we could, just to reiterate, blockers and technical issues or, queries that go unanswered, which cause people to lose a day. I think, that's something which people need to be aware of. That really then makes the delivery slip and, just quite unproductive is what it is. So, Mike, did you have any examples, I mean, from your experience, right, which you want to talk about?
Yeah, related to that, definitely. So, I'm kind of a flow type of person. So I'm more, my background is more with Kanban style processes or some kind of combination of Kanban and Scrum. So in the flow processes, it's really important to focus on blockers and keeping the flow moving. And I think what you're talking about here, it just doubles, you have to double down on that. Regardless of the process you're using. We have to be really honest with ourselves about what is a blocking issue, on all sides of the table. And then, really focus to get that blocking issue resolved during the overlap so that you don't end up losing a day, because that's where most of that happens. Is there's a bug and you don't really understand how the product's supposed to work, and so the QA person's reaching out to the product owner and they don't connect, and then the next thing you know, that bug doesn't get fixed, right? And now that puts the sprint or whatever process you're using at risk, because that's just one more day that, especially if you're getting towards the end of the cycle, like that kind of thing just totally hurt you. So getting the culture to a place where people really focus on, if you're on the US side, I guess the later time zone, looking at your email and answering those questions that need immediate responses, like as a first order priority, right? Do that first, and then go on to your next things that you're doing. Even if the other things are seemingly more important, you have to think in the teaming sense, right? You can't just look at your workload and do what's optimal for you. You have to think about what's optimal for the whole team. This is true, what I'm saying when I think about it is true regardless of what you're doing, right? Even if you're the same team in the same room, these concepts still very much apply. It's just, like I say, it doubles down or triples down when the remote, when you're dealing with this remote situation and your overlap, your time that you can actually sync up with people is reduced. So that's my thought there. And I think you guys have experienced that both positively and negatively. So, and I'm sure everyone in the audience probably has as well. So with that, Paul, let's so you told a story at the beginning of you had some concerns, and we talked about those concerns and all that. So what's the real story in terms of losing a day for you? 2 years later, do you see this happen very often? Do you miss objectives very often? And is it related to these time zone challenges? If it is, if you do have that problem.
I'd say honestly now, granted early on, we had some lost time here and there until we really started working on some of these processes and looking at them and trying to figure out where we could make improvements, which is another thing the leadership did really well, which was they were very open to suggestions from both teams to say, how we can improve these things. But 2 years later, looking now, I would honestly say we don't lose any time. I think if we have one challenge now, I think it's still communication. But I think that challenge is always there, no matter whether you're sitting next to a person or you're separated by an ocean. It doesn't really matter. Communication is critical, and so it's always something you have to keep in the back of your mind. But as far as lost time, no, I don't think we lose any time at all. I think our velocity picked up whenever everybody went work remote. So when people were no longer sitting next to each other, we actually got better. Excuse me. So, but as far as lost time, no, I'm not concerned about that at all anymore.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds like a real success story. But things don't always turn out that well. It's a testament to the hard work, I'm sure, that your team and everyone involved.
Both sides, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. It also boils down to software development discipline as well. I mean, if you're talking about software specifically, right? And communication. So I have examples where for a web app, backend developers are in a different others, the front-end developers are in different others, and somebody goes and changes the JSON response, I mean, on the backend and commits that on a Friday, and the entire system goes for a toss because nothing ever works. Because hey, you know what? You change the key, and now the UI can't render. So I mean, these are things which more communication, proper regression testing, proper code reviews, cross code reviews. So somebody from every office is involved in looking at what the other guy in the other office is doing. I think sometimes that helps a lot to make sure that things don't break when everything comes together at the end of a sprint.
And
Yeah.
on that note, we have to require 2 reviews for every commit. So the 2 developers have to review it, and we're encouraging a developer from each location to review every commit. So to avoid that exact scenario, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, I found that automation, like having continuous integration type automation, so that a check-in is always validated, at least for critical path things, like you can't get the web page to render because you changed a core feature. I found that's been very helpful in teams that I've worked with. And there's also a discipline, like if you check in your code, you have to wait for that to go through that entire process before you go home, right? Because we put that process in place, and then people would check in and go home, and then it didn't really help, right? Because it would come back broken, everyone would be complaining because they can't sync to the branch, and the problem isn't solved. So it took, again, that's a cultural change. The team has to really embrace some of these things as a cultural shift and think bigger than their own personal situation, right? I mean, I think in this example I'm giving, I was even a developer at that time. I was still a lead developer in that. So this is in the Wayback Machine. And sometimes you just not check in because you needed to rush out, right? Like you have a dentist appointment or something like that. You don't check in. Now with modern tooling, you can check in kind of locally, and like it's way better than that. But like I said, this is the Wayback Machine. So these are all really great things, Mukund. I'm glad you brought that up, because all these disciplines really help us be more successful. So that's great. Actually, I do have a question from the audience. So I'm going to just ask Mukund, I'm going to target this at you, because you've seen a lot of engagements here. Architectural changes, is that something that you can do to facilitate better remote working? And I would guess, I mean, my general high level thought here is, if you were, for instance, have a microservice where you could give ownership to a remote team, that seems like it might help. What do you think about that?
Service-oriented architecture can help isolate development so that people don't step on each other's foot every so often, but that's really not a concern with the tools like Git. I mean, the code the merge capability of tools like Git is so advanced that it's not as bad as it used to be, right? Back in the SVN days or the CVS days. So architecture can help with the speeding up the development and the time to market. I don't really think it can help with remote work as much. Isolating work between 2 teams so that they can build what they want to build at full, without dependency on the other team, sounds like a good idea, but then the integration is going to hit you at some point of time. So the discipline which in the development process and the more frequent communication, I think, is what is more key. I mean, at least that's my opinion on the matter. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Paul or Mike?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. I think building architectural, and we've actually done this, actually building architectural changes in basically one team or a silo. It seemed like a good idea, and then when it came time to integrate, we had some challenges. And and those things do happen. So I think architecturally, now when we try to do architectural changes, we try to bring the entire team in on it as early as possible, so they can understand why we're doing it. And there's always going to be, right, it's always an iteration. So eventually everybody on the team will have a hand in it.
Yeah. And for technical example, one example is where they had to build some feature store, and one of the teams used, I mean, it's a bit technical, but okay, they used the data storage in the backend that was which served their purpose for their part of the service. And when they went for integration, they found that another team wanted to run OLTP transactions on top of it. And this data store was not meant for it. And that kind of blocked the feature from shipping, because now we know our reports are way too slow. They are broken. This is not how it should be. So that integration is way better than isolation, I think, just to reiterate.
Yeah, interesting. That's a good, interesting and good perspective. Yeah, it's certainly a communication. Anytime you're doing integration work, communication has to be really high, right? So that you don't get those mismatches you're talking about. Totally makes sense. Well, I think we're at the end of our topics. I don't see any more questions from the audience. So I want to thank the panelists for joining me today. Paul and Mukund, it was very much appreciated. I think it was a great conversation. It was great hearing your stories, Paul, and Mukund, hearing your wisdom. And I also want to thank the audience for joining as well. Without the audience, we don't have a need to do this. So as always, we appreciate your attendance, and we hope to see you in a future Zip Chat. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Paul.